right, today we're going to talk about Julius Caesar, and we're going to talk about his influence on the world. But before we do that, we're going to spiral all the way back to prehistoric man, stuff that we did at the beginning of the year. So raise your hand if you know the 5 materials that prehistoric man used for tools. Okay. Stone, bone, antler, ivory, and wood, right? Bonus, what was the first metal? Raise your hand if you know that. First metal that man smelt. Copper, wasn't it? So, raise your hand if you know what nomadic means. Okay, no permanent home. You agree? Now, just because they didn't have a permanent home, if they lived in a cave in the springtime, just because they followed the food, they could still come back to that same cave. It's just that it was not a permanent settlement. Raise your hand if you know what Paleolithic man used for shelter. I already said one of them. Okay, caves and those mammoth bone huts. You all remember that? What did Neolithic man use for shelter? They built wooden houses, didn't they? You all agree? Now, the reason that Neolithic man was able to build permanent homes was because of domestication. Raise your hand if you remember what domestication means. Right, control of plants and animals. Control how much and where they are. Good job. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about Julius Caesar. So our head scratcher, how can one person change history? Now we know that, we've talked about this, one person can change history from good or bad. Remember we talked about Qin Shi Huangdi from China? Now he was not very nice, he was a lunatic, but he did build the Great Wall of China, didn't he? And he unified the tribes. We're going to talk about someone like that today with Julius Caesar. Next. So our essential question, how did Julius Caesar come to power? Next. So what are we doing? We are examining Julius Caesar's impact on Rome. Why are we doing this? It's a tested Tennessee tested standard, 655. Next. So our main idea is you're going to have angry poor people, power-hungry generals, ambitious politicians. They all threaten the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic will die today, after 500 years. Julius Caesar gained absolute control of the Republic, but did not rule long. Most people don't realize that. After Caesar was assassinated, Augustus founded an empire that enjoyed peace and prosperity for about 200 years. Now, the Roman Empire is going to last 500 years, but they're only going to have really strong peace and prosperity for the first 200 of it. Next. So conflicts at home. What led to conflict in Rome? Now, we talked a little bit about this. I don't know if you all watched the video on Tiberius Granicus or the other classes did. What's going on right now around the 100s BC is you're going to have the Roman elite, the patricians, are going to have so much wealth and power that they really are starting to neglect what they're supposed to do to take care of everybody else. Hit next. So you're going to have the patricians have all this wealth and power. Then you're going to have this guy, Tiberius Granicus, who's going to try to fight for the poor, to get them some land, especially the former soldiers, because they didn't have any. But the patricians, the rich, are really going to fight against that. This guy Tiberius becomes a tribune, and then he runs for a second term, which we weren't supposed to do, and the senators killed him on the Senate chamber. So you're going to fast forward to several years after that. The differences increase between the rich and the poor. Now remember I told you that whenever the poor of any civilization, whenever their lives are so bad that they're willing to risk death, you're going to have problems. Now, unlike that, when our own country was founded, we revolted over $5 a year of taxes. We started dropping British bodies because of that. Because Americans were smart and they had known this Roman history. Hey, we're not going to let the rich people tax us and make us super poor. We're not going to let that happen. But that was happening in the Roman Republic around the 100s BC. And what happens is you're going to have these generals say, hey, we're going to take care of the poor. You all follow us. We're going to take over. And so you're going to have the Roman Civil War between the rich and the poor. You're going to have the plebeians, led by Maximus. Next. And then you're going to have the patricians, led by Sulla. Now, the patricians will win. But what the patricians do, what the patricians do is they say, okay, we need a dictator in times of emergency. Everybody knows what dictator is, right? It's an absolute ruler. Now that goes against everything the Roman Republic was founded on. They were against all kings, but what they said is we could name a dictator who can rule us without absolute authority, but he can't name a successor. You know, the power will go back to the Romans when the need is done. So this guy named Sulla becomes dictator in 82 BC. Next. So who fought in the Civil War? Everybody know? Everybody raise your hand if you know. Patricians versus plebeians, right? Plebeians are the poor, patricians are the rich. Now, this is where you get the name rich. Patricians, and I get the word rich in there. Next. So Julius Caesar. Who was Julius Caesar? Julius Caesar, go ahead. Julius Caesar was born to an old noble family. He was a patrician. He was a rich kid. He was rich and powerful because his family was rich and powerful. He eventually joins the Senate, but he wasn't just a senator. He was also an army general, and he was really, really good. Okay, so what happens is Sulla dies, and so there's kind of a vie for power. So what you're going to have is you're going to have Julius Caesar, this guy named Pompey, and this guy named Crassus form a three-pronged leadership. Julius Caesar will be the military guy. And then you're going to have Pompey, who's the rich guy. And then, or Pompey's the senator, and then you're going to have Crassus, who's the rich guy. So they're going to say, hey, we've got everything covered. We're going to be in charge of everything. So this is called the first triumvirate. Tri means three, right? Next. But Caesar was not just a patrician. He was not just a senator. He was also a military general, and he was very, very good. He had fought in Asia Minor, which we know is Turkey, and Spain against barbarians, but he proved himself a great military general when he fought Gaul, which is modern-day France, and he had defeated them. So, he was extremely popular. He was popular with his men because he brought him victory and riches. He was popular with the people because as a senator, he wanted reforms for the poor. He was incredibly famous. So he is at the height of power. Next. But as a politician, he was a reformer. He worked for who? He worked for the poor. He wanted the poor. Girls, up here. He wanted the poor to have better conditions. So the rich are going to oppose him. So what they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, disband your army and come home. What are they going to do to him? We'll kill him, right? Because he had seen this before. And so instead of doing that, he makes one of the most monumental decisions in Roman Republic history. He does not disband his army. He brings them with him. Well, his famous quote is he crosses the Rubicon, which is the river on the border of Italy, brings his army with him. He says, I have crossed the Rubicon, let the bridge be burned behind us, so no escape, and the die is cast. So what's going to happen? Either I'm going to get killed, or I'm going to get power. And that's what he wanted. One of his famous quotes is, I would rather be first citizen in the barbarian lands than second citizen in Rome. He wants power. So he leads his army. He fights with Pompey. Crassus had died. He fights with Pompey in 46 BC, and he wins. So the Senate, because they're afraid of him, because he brings his army with him, they come in triumphantly, right? He brings his army with him. They've defeated the opposition. Crassus has died. He's the first guy. And so they name him dictator for life. Okay, you can be a dictator for the rest of your life. Right? Next. He was an absolute ruler, but he started many reforms. He actually expands the Senate. He enforced laws. He created jobs. He was extremely popular. So what does the Senate get afraid of? They're afraid he's going to name his successor, which doesn't make him a dictator. It makes him what? Starts with a K. A king. Okay, that's supposed to talk. Just method. It makes him a king. They're afraid that he would name his successor and they would start having a king. and that they would lose power, and they would dissolve some of their lands and give it to the poor. And he would be dictator for life and name his son. Now, he didn't have a son. He had a great nephew that he named as his son. And so what happens on August 15th, go ahead and hit next. On August 15th, 44 BC, he's only ruler for less than 2 years. On March 15th, he goes into the Senate and they stab him 100 times on the floor of the Senate and assassinate him. So what happens there is Julius Caesar, who was extremely popular. He was popular with the army. He was popular with the poor. He was rich and powerful from an old patrician family. He is stabbed and killed on the floor of the Senate. And what that does is that really ticks off his son, well, his named son. His name is Augustus. And Augustus is coming for the people who killed Julius Caesar. We'll talk about that tomorrow. With the death of Julius Caesar, the Roman Republic ends. And everything those senators were afraid of actually now happens. There is no indication that Caesar would have named his son as an heir. Maybe there was. But everything they were afraid of is getting ready to happen. The Roman Republic ends right now. The Roman Empire starts tomorrow. So as we say in my class, go forth and learn, because knowledge is